Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sascha Fahrbach. As Hungary approaches parliamentary elections April 12th, the opposition Tisza party has widened its lead over Prime Minister Viktor Orbán's Fidesz party, according to a recent poll conducted by Median. Now, the survey shows Tisza, led by Peter Magyar, ahead by 23 percentage points among decided voters. Meanwhile, in an interview published Wednesday on X, Prime Minister Orbán stated, quote, "The future belongs to Central Europe, but relations with Russia must be reorganized." Now, joining us to discuss the implications is Stefano Bottoni, professor at the University of Florence, whose research focuses on the political and social history of East Central Europe under socialism, Soviet bloc security systems, and post-communist transformations. Good to have you with us on TVP World. So I want to just jump in right away and just get the latest here. I mean, if we're looking at polls, I mean, they tend to fluctuate. The newest ones here, apparently 23-point lead over Fidesz by the challenger. If we look at this historically, how significant is that where we are right now? Those elections are coming up very soon. What's your take?
This might be an inflection point. So the widening gap between Tisza and Fidesz might also mean the starting on the collapse of the Orban system. I was also already very skeptical about the possibility of an electoral collapse of Fidesz. I saw it shrinking, so I thought that they are well beyond the peak and they can lose the elections, but only by a narrow margin. But what is happening now is an overheated electoral campaign with threats, with a massive implication of the Hungarian secret services, of the state apparatus into the campaign on the side of the power. And on the other side, we see on the streets and during mass rallies that the opposition is really having momentum. So I tend to believe that Median, who is also the most experienced pollster in Hungary and the well-placed in the public reputation, if they show such an advantage of 15 or even more than 20%, it depends on, we are considering those who already decided to vote or the whole of the population. This must be taken seriously, and it also might lead to a landslide victory of Peter Magyar and Tisza party unless something happens, unless Viktor Orbán decides to act against this.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about Viktor Orbán for a moment now. I mean, this is a man also who's been in power quite some time. You've studied him yourself. I mean, this is an interesting story by in of itself. But nevertheless, you're talking about a potential landslide for the opposition Tisza party. Let's mark it and say if that does come to pass. Do you think that Orbán would accept that?
This is what we don't know. This is the small detail we don't know about these elections and about the possible outcome and the near future of Hungary. And this is a massive factor of uncertainty. We have no idea, literally no idea, of what is going to happen on April 13th after the elections. What will be the reaction of Viktor Orbán? We have to see a couple of things. First, this is not a government, but a power system, and a constitutional power system. This is very different from what Poland experienced between 2015 and 2023. Second, Viktor Orbán and his cronies have accumulated a personal fortune, which is now evaluated by independent Hungarian journalists and investigative analysts between 25 and 28 billion euros. This is a massive amount of money. So we are not only speaking about power, which is also important, but we are speaking about being able to keep a substantial part of the Hungarian economy in your own hands. So this is what is at stake at the elections. And third, and not last, the meddling of basically almost all the so-called great powers. So we have the United States and his president, Donald Trump, and Russia with Vladimir Putin, both on the same page here. They are massively and openly campaigning for Viktor Orbán and apparently sustaining him. So this is unprecedented, and of course it makes impossible any comparison for me as a historian with the previous system change of 1989, where the US and the former Soviet Union basically agreed to a peaceful transition in Hungary. Here, so-called great powers are not agreeing at all on a peaceful transition and on leaving Viktor Orbán's hands. This is a massive difference.
Mm-hmm. And also, you spoke of Russia there. I mean, it's no secret that Viktor Orbán has very much played to that. He's visited Moscow. He's really touted that relationship very well. At the same time, also to the United States with Donald Trump, let's not forget. I want to ask you about this recent interview where he's talked about the rising state of Central Europe, and also saying that the future belongs to Central Europe. Relations with Russia must be organized. In fact, they should be normalized. I mean, it doesn't come as a surprise, but what does this do for him, and how much does this actually resonate with the electorate?
The vast majority of the Hungarian electorate has been always indifferent to foreign policy issues. The only exception was 2022, when Viktor Orbán was able to campaign over Ukraine and over a peace position, over a non-intervention position in the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, and won the 2022 election basically by this. But starting from that, internal points like poverty, corruption, shrinking economy, and so on, stagflation, have become dominant. So I don't think that the planned visit of Vice President J.D. Vance to Hungary, which is now scheduled for April 7th or 8th, so just before the elections and after Easter, could have any impact on the Hungarian electorate. Of course, we don't know what kind of Russian meddling can still be expected in the next weeks, and of course this kind of meddling would be much more discreet. Vladimir Putin or Lavrov, Foreign Minister Lavrov, are not expected to come to Budapest to endorse Viktor Orbán, but their endorsement is expressed, and we know now all this, through the creation of thousands of fake TikTok and Facebook profiles, using bots, using digital warfare in order to help their ally.
Mm-hmm. You also mentioned Russia and all these connections. I'm just curious, and we've also had in recent sort of 24, 48 hours, these allegations as well of leaks also between the Hungarian side and Russia. There's even more in terms of even the opposition leader, Peter Magyar, said this is worse than Watergate. I mean, the connections there of any sort of Russian connection into Hungary, how much is this going to impact this campaign? Will this sway voters either way?
Look, I have never heard thousands of people shouting in the street like on March 15, on the big celebrations of March 15, Ruski Koza, which is Russians go home from Hungary, of course. It last happened in 1956. So Russia has become an issue, and not because of its external policy, but because we are really speaking about the core of internal politics. So the Orbán regime linked itself so much to Russia, and some of its actors, for example, Foreign Minister Péter Szijjártó, made in such an open way clear that they are closely linked to Russian officials, and they are very proud about it. They don't even hide it. That all this now has an impact on the public opinion, since investigative journalists are exposing basically now almost every day new insights on Russian meddling, and this is creating public outrage. This is creating discomfort in the public opinion. Let's not forget that most Hungarians, until very recently, even those siding with Viktor Orbán, they were basically anti-Russians and anti-Soviets. So they had this kind of very skeptical, or if not hostile, attitude towards Russia for historical, psychological reasons. Viktor Orbán succeeded, apparently, in reverting this into public support for Russia. But now, the fact that the so-called sovereign camp is, in fact, a basis for operations of Russia against the EU, which is basically the only ally of Hungary, which is basically the only really peace project of our time, while all the friends of Viktor Orbán, starting from Trump, Netanyahu, Vladimir Putin, or Iran, are now waging wars. So this really undermines the core of the discourse of Viktor Orbán and makes again Russia and the Russian involvement in European politics an internal discourse in Hungary.
Mm-hmm. I was also curious, I wanted to ask you a bit further, because you mentioned, I mean, you've seen, rather we've all seen these major street protests, high mobilization of people around Hungary, especially in the big cities. I'm just curious, do you think that, I know you spoke of an inflection point, but we've seen similar things before. Is this really that different moment? And also what's happening in the countryside? I mean, that's also really key to what happens on those final election days. Is that also mirrored? Is this mobilization for change also mirrored in the countryside? And will this carry out through till April 12th?
This is a very different situation from the previous ones. First, the economy is doing much worse. Hungary lacks more than 20 billion euros frozen EU funds, and this really hurts, even to the system. Second, the opponent is totally different. Péter Magyar comes from within the system, knows perfectly how the system works, and he is incredibly effective in damaging the system and exposing its weaknesses and internal contradictions. Third, the countryside. This is precisely what changed. Look at Péter Magyar's daily rallies in the countryside. He has been touring the country for months, if not years. There is no single Hungarian settlement. Of course, Hungary is much smaller than Poland, but yet there is basically no single Hungarian settlements with more than 400 inhabitants that hasn't been visited at least once by Péter Magyar. Péter Magyar is doing 5 events a day nowadays, and even in smaller place, we see hundreds or even a couple of thousands of people, basically the whole village or the small town, gathering to listen to him. This is totally unprecedented in a country where political involvement and political interest was at a very low level, and turnout could be a key. Turnout is expected to be well above 70% nationwide, or even 75%, which would be an all-time record. And this time, this is not only Budapest and a couple of major cities. It is basically the whole urban environment and also some parts in the village. So
from the village, as you said, sorry to jump in there, from the village, as you said, from a small town countryside to the urban centers, it really is unprecedented. I'm afraid we'll have to close it there, but thanks for all those insights there. Professor Stefano Bottoni, much appreciated. And thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks, but stay right here on TVP World for more. Goodbye.